Power utility Eskom has asked the National Energy Regulator of South Africa for a whopping 36% increase in electricity tariffs for the 2025 financial year. This will be followed by 12% for the 2026-2027 financial year, and then an increase of 9% for 27 and 28. If approved, the price hike would allow Eskom to collect 446 billion rand in revenue in 2026, 495 billion rand for 27 and 537 billion rand for 2028. Now, Nersa is calling for public comment with a closing date for the submission of written comments at 4 p.m. on the 1st of November. You've got exactly a month for that. But to talk more on the matter, we are joined by Eskom's Chief Financial Officer, Calib Cassim. Calib, good to have you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Leanne. My pleasure.
All right. My first and most pressing question, which I think I'm asking on behalf of most South Africans, where's the load shedding gone? What happened? Why do we suddenly have electricity? I think South Africans generally ask, where is the electricity? But now we're asking, why do we have it? What suddenly went right?
So I think firstly, just the focus in terms of Eskom's recovery plan, which started at the beginning of last year, and in the diligence of the generation leadership from Becky and each power station manager, supported by the rest of the Eskom staff. So focus on getting the performance of each power station to the level that is required, but also supported from a financial perspective, from a procurement perspective, and the other support services. And then I think it's again, Leanne, as the generation team achieved 1 week, we then looked for 1 month, 2 months, etc. So the confidence is up in the organization, not only within generation, but the rest of the organization.
And that's an important question. And I'm going to move on to the pricing now, but I really just want to just clarity on this, because there was so much talk about sabotage at Eskom, workers doing things and people not working together, and there was major problems within the organization. From your perspective, are you seeing a massive turnaround? Have you seen a big change where finally Eskom is starting to work on what it's meant to be working on?
100%. I think firstly, just the communities and each power station, all the staff at a power station, they have one simple objective every day when they walk in: get their stations to produce the megawatts, do it safely and supported by the rest of the business. What we've also acknowledged is the support we've received from law enforcement agencies. You've seen a number of arrests recently as well. So I think that goes hand in hand with everyone putting their hands on deck at each of the power stations, Leanne.
All right, okay. Calib, I suppose we need to sit down with the CEO and maybe even the chairman to quiz a little bit more about the workings in there. But now I quiz you about money, because South Africans are not happy with what may come their way. Eskom's tariff increase, I mean, at a time where cost of living is just so high, Calib, I mean, what are you basing these applications on? Perhaps we can start there.
Yeah, so firstly, we do acknowledge from Eskom and the board as well that it is a difficult and a steep application, especially obviously in the first year. Then, Leanne, appreciating that the basis of the application is for Eskom to recover the cost of production, being your primary energy at the power stations, plus your operating costs. Now, in the makeup of this 36%, there are 3 key drivers. First is the operating costs. Those costs compared to Nersa's reference point, which is embedded in this year's price. There is a steep increase in that. Secondly, the component that relates to what we call policy-related items, introduction of a carbon tax, and then we've also put in an element for the challenges around the municipal debt and the arrear debts, put in a component for that being 2% of arrear debts versus what we're actually incurring at the moment, which is double that at 4%. And last but not least, on our asset base, we need the return on assets to migrate from 1.6%, and we phase it into a 4%, 5%, and 6% because we're not recovering our cost of capital. At the end of the day, in funding our operations and our capital expenditure going forward, if we cannot recover from the electricity consumer, and currently in the debt relief program, we're not allowed to borrow, we would then have to look at other alternatives in what it means in terms of operational implications and spend on executing your capital projects.
Yeah. I suppose one needs to ask the question, I mean, did you consult with the South African Local Government Association as well as National Treasury before submitting to Nersa? Were they in approval of the amounts that you put forward?
So yes, from a legislative perspective, in terms of the Municipal Finance Management Act, we make our submission to them and we receive comments. Obviously, they've given us those comments. We summarize that in our application, and yes, there was pushback on the high price increase, but Eskom is also from a responsibility perspective to ensure that we maintain our operations and we continue with our turnaround program whilst also remaining a going concern entity and doing it in such a way that after the debt relief from government that has put in 250 billion rand, we don't go back in 3 years' time and ask government for more money. Cumulatively to date, Leanne, National Treasury and government have put in over this period in the region of 480 billion. And one of the fundamental reasons for that is two elements. If we're not recovering our operating costs through the tariff consumer, we have a shortfall, and whilst we're maintaining the operations, we have no other option but to go back and approach government. The second other challenge, which we're all well aware with, is the issue around collecting from the municipalities. That is currently sitting at 80 billion rand. It's not sustainable for Eskom nor any other business. And through government, we need to improve the collective from what is due from the municipalities. Eskom cannot be a bank to the municipalities.
I mean, but when certainly not, and that is a major issue, is to make municipalities pay, because I mean it's unacceptable that is even a conversation to be had. But you know, one of the issues is perhaps even how the Minister of Electricity, Josienso Ramokgopa, put it, is that these tariffs are high, and even higher tariffs are absolutely unaffordable for most people in this country, which again will lead to even more non-payment. Perhaps your reaction to those comments from the Minister?
So definitely, you know, there's the terminology that is used with regard to a debt spiral. As the price goes up further, we'll get less and less consumers staying on the grid, and also the payment, the non-payment will increase. But at the end of the day, Leanne, you know, it does cost in generating that electricity. Eskom procures its services via fundamentally open tender processes. Those come through, and if I take, for example, our biggest cost item, coal, effectively for the first year, all of that is already contracted as we went through a open tender process. So those are costs that are committed to, that we have to recover. If through the regulatory decision, there's an amount that is disallowed from the regulator, we still have to pay the coal suppliers the amount, and then we will have to find that shortfall. And currently, we're not allowed to borrow in terms of the debt relief, and the debt relief is used to pay interest costs and capital. You can't use it for operating costs, which by implication means it leaves Eskom in an awkward position to decide which operating costs to incur and which ones to stop, or alternatively, deliver on your operating costs and slow down your capital expenditure, which will come back at a later stage with devastating implications into the sustainability of our asset base. So it is trade-offs in which we find ourselves as Eskom, but we need to do it in conjunction with working with government. How do we deal with the municipalities? Yes, we understand in Nersa making the tariff decision, there needs to be mechanisms, Leanne, to protect the vulnerable sectors, be it commercial and industrial, as well as for residential consumers. Those mechanisms need to be transparent to the South African public, that everyone understands how you're going to cushion those sectors.
Okay, let's talk about previous years, and I don't want to dwell too much on municipalities because I think you have spoken to them, and the non-payment is unacceptable, and that's where they certainly even again the minister needs to get involved in that, and perhaps will. But when we talk about load shedding, when it was rife, diesel was used to run these open cycle gas turbines at great costs, but this year the use of diesel has significantly gone down, and yet this tariff hike issue still remains. Is there any way of explaining this to us?
So yeah, I think it's I think what we've seen in the last 2 years when we ran our OCGT significantly, that then, Leanne, culminated into what we call a load factor for these stations at around 17%, 18% per annum, which meant that Eskom spent around 30 billion rand in those years, whereas Nersa allowed us a 6% load factor at a diesel recovery cost of about 8 billion rand. In our application for MYPD6, with the improvement in the generation fleet, we've only asked for a 6% load factor, which equates to about an 8 or 9 billion rand OCGT amount. So Leanne, I think from that component of the tariff increase, that is in line with what Nersa has allowed, and there shouldn't be a problem. In the past, what has happened was when Eskom spends 30 billion and only recovers 8 billion from the consumer through the tariff, there's a 20 billion shortfall effectively that Eskom had to borrow for to allow these stations to produce, or alternatively, you do it up to the amount that you have cash, and then it means implications in terms of the stages of load shedding.
Yeah.
So I think key point here is in the application at a 6% load factor by OCGTs. It's driven by the other cost components because our absolute cost for Eskom year on year averages around 6 to 7%. However, from a Nersa perspective, you're coming off a much lower reference point, which means there needs to be an adjustment. So if I just contextualize it for the current financial year, the gap between Eskom's costs incurred versus what is allowed by the current tariff is 40 billion rand. So what this decision is asking for in the first year in particular, let's close that gap of the 40 billion so that then going forward, we don't have a significant gap in terms of a cash flow requirement.
Yeah.
And that is what's being asked for fundamentally the first year. And that is why once you adjust the first year, the second and third year is much smaller.
It certainly is a very bitter pill to swallow, as you can imagine, for South Africans having to pay for this. I mean, when you read numbers, according to the South African Reserve Bank, between 2007 and 2022, the average Eskom tariff increase has gone up by 450%. Not sure what else Eskom needs from South Africans to achieve financial health. We're getting to a point, and I hope you can speak to that, and also the closing comments, where I've seen that your chairman has come out defending the fact of what a lot of economists and futurists are saying, that Eskom is going to actually price themselves completely out of the market because it's cheaper to go and install solar into our houses now, as many South Africans and businesses have done, than to actually pay Eskom and to keep Eskom going, where it doesn't matter how much we pay, the money just gets burnt and we keep on asking for more and more. Perhaps you can speak to that.
So Leanne, what we see as Eskom, I think two important points. Once we close this gap in terms of the operating costs or fundamentally, substantially close it. Yes, we must deliver on our own efficiencies, and you can get that return on assets to increase on an asset base where we align with the regulator. We foresee that then the increases in electricity should be effectively at around 10% or maybe slightly under 10%. But as I said, the key other element for what we are billing, if we are not collecting it, it puts further pressure. I think the only other point I want to make around, for example, solar, you know, when the sun is not shining and you get to the evening and you don't have sufficient backup power or batteries, you would then call on Eskom to deliver that electricity. And Eskom has to maintain and service the infrastructure. When it's a bad weather conditions, Eskom will be called upon to deliver that supply to the country, which comes at a cost. So the consumers would have to pay for Eskom being the battery to the country. We've seen what happened over the last weekend when we had the snowfalls. There was no renewables on that day, and effectively Eskom had to make good that shortfall. So I think that's the overall cost that consumers must take into account. And if the country wants Eskom to be the overall battery when the renewables are not working, then we should be paid for that.
All right, we leave it there. Caleb, thank you. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank
Calib
you.
Cassim,
Pleasure.
Eskom's Chief Financial Officer, speaking to us about this proposed tariff increase from Eskom. We're talking over 44% in the next few years is what they're asking for.